Strasbourg was oblivious to everything that day. The city had awakened as usual. Shopkeepers were setting up their stalls, and children were running about in the narrow streets. For this small Alsatian town within the borders of the Holy Roman Empire, July had begun with sweltering heat. Then a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped out of her house. She wasn't on a crowded street. There was no deliberate performance. No one was standing there to watch her. She simply stood in front of her house and began to dance. Contemporary accounts meticulously noted this. There was no music in the air, no instruments, no rhythm, no joy. Trophäa was shaking with movements that had completely lost all control. Her husband rushed out, trying to stop her. He begged. He grabbed her arms. It did no good. She danced until nightfall, until she collapsed to the ground. When she woke up in the morning, she started again on her swollen, bleeding feet. By the third day, a crowd had gathered. Peddlers, porters, churchmen. They were all faced with the same thing, something that could not be stopped. The authorities, panicking, banished her from the city. They sent him to Saverne, about 50 kilometers away, to the shrine of St. Vitus. Perhaps he would recover there, but it was too late. In the days following Trophäa's departure, some of those who had witnessed his strange performance began to do the same. Within a few days, 34 people. By the time August arrived, the number had risen to 400. Some danced so wildly that the only thing capable of stopping them was death. The city was now unrecognizable. In the streets, there were people lying prostrate on the ground, moaning, their faces drenched in sweat, their eyes vacant and lifeless. Their arms flailed, their clothes torn. Blood oozed from their feet, staining the stone pavements red. Some writhed in chest pain, others saw hallucinations. Some fell into epileptic seizures. And no one stopped. The Strasbourg City Council could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening in the streets. They summoned the physicians. They debated. And finally, they reached a diagnosis. Remember that modern medicine, neurology, and psychiatry didn't yet exist. For a 16th century physician, reality was the system established 2,000 years earlier by the ancient Roman physician Galen. The idea that the body consisted of 4 fundamental humors: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm, and that health depended on their balance. The doctor's diagnosis was this: the patient's blood had become overheated. A person whose brain overheated could go mad, lose control. It made sense, at least for that era. So what was the solution? Here lies a turning point. The standard method was bloodletting. But this time, the doctors thought differently. They said, these patients need to expel that excessive heat, that faulty blood, from their bodies. There's only one way they can do this: by dancing and sweating. The more they dance, the more they sweat. The more they sweat, the more they'll heal. The council adopted this recommendation without question. And then it made what may be history's most well-intentioned, yet also most tragic public health decision. The city's 2 large guild halls were cleared out. The open grain market was designated for the sacrificial dancers. A large wooden stage was erected in the city center, and then the most unimaginable decision trumpeters, drummers, bagpipers, and professional dancers were hired to keep the sick on their feet, to invigorate them further. When they grew tired, when they stumbled, the musicians picked up the tempo. You can imagine what happened. To an outsider, it might have looked like a strange carnival. From the inside, it was hell. The music, the crowd, the spectacle, all of it fueled the outbreak. More spectators, already psychologically fragile, stared at this hysterical scene and eventually became part of it themselves. The victims succumbed to organ failure one by one. Exhausted, dehydrated, and starving, they collapsed to the ground. And some never got back up. When the deaths began, the council slowly faced reality. They dismissed the musicians. They dismantled the stages. Then, throughout the entire city, Dancing, music, gambling, and gatherings were banned, and the surviving dancers were sent to Saverne. There, they were made to wear red shoes. Crosses were drawn on their foreheads. Holy water was sprinkled on them. Accompanied by the priest's Latin prayers, they walked around the altar. And slowly, by early September, 2 months after the outbreak began, the curtain fell on this strange, bloody, tragic ballet. In 1374, immediately after the Black Death wiped out a third of Europe's population, the same frenzy erupted in the city of Aachen. This time, it wasn't confined to just one city. It spread across a vast region stretching from Liège to Utrecht, Cologne, Flanders, Metz, and as far north as Italy. Tens of thousands of people linking arms to form circles, collapsing to the ground from exhaustion, able to breathe easily only when bandages were wrapped around their waists. The church declared them to be in the devil's clutches and held exorcism ceremonies. In southern Italy, however, this phenomenon took on a completely different form. In the Taranto region, peasants working in the fields fell ill from spider bites and believed they had to dance for days to sweat out the poison. This was called Tarantism. Special music was played for therapeutic purposes. The origins of the Tarantella dance, which is still performed today, can be traced back to this practice. Ironically, in 1693, a doctor from Naples deliberately allowed himself to be bitten by 2 tarantulas, and nothing happened. In other words, that dance was a response created not by the venom, but by the mind. Different regions, different centuries, different reasons. But the essence was the same. People were losing control of their bodies, and no one could really explain why. Why Strasbourg? Why 1518? To understand this, you need to know what happened before the dancing began. For 30 years leading up to 1518, Strasbourg had been struggling with a succession of disasters. A severe famine in 1492, another in 1502, again in 1511, once more in 1516. And in 1495, a new disease arrived in the city that Europe hadn't even heard of yet: syphilis. It was killing people by opening horrific sores on their bodies. The year 1517 went down in history as the bad year. Bread prices were at an all-time high. That same year, the British sweat disease, the cause of which remains unclear and which can kill a person within a few hours, also made its appearance. On top of all this, a comet that appeared in the sky in 1492 was, to an uneducated, superstitious populace, a harbinger of God's wrath. The floods and scorching summers that followed only reinforced this fear. By 1518, the people of Strasbourg were mired in 25 years of accumulated trauma, malnutrition, fear of death, unrelenting suffering, and most of all, the feeling that there was no way out. This situation is the perfect breeding ground for what psychologists refer to as mass hysteria. In the 1950s, a pharmacologist drew an intriguing connection. In Strasbourg, it was highly likely that a fungus called ergot was growing on rye. This fungus contained a substance structurally related to LSD. Perhaps people had unknowingly eaten this moldy bread and experienced hallucinations? For a time, this theory was considered plausible. But then, in 2008, historian John Waller from Michigan State University debunked this theory with his comprehensive analysis. First, ergot poisoning causes people to have seizures and be unable to get out of bed for days. Second, the most distinctive symptom of this fungus is gangrene that constricts blood vessels, turning the hands and feet black and causing them to rot. Historical records mention that dancers' feet swelled and bled, but the word gangrene doesn't appear even once. Third, ergot grows only on rye, yet the dancing plague was observed in dozens of different regions with varying climates and dietary habits. The theory proposed by Waller and now embraced by the vast majority of disciplines in psychology, history, and anthropology points to something different. The victims weren't faking it. They weren't acting. They were genuinely experiencing something, but that something was called a dissociative trance. It's a state in which the brain blocks pain signals in response to extreme trauma, and consciousness shifts into an abnormal state. Under normal conditions, the human body is not programmed to exert effort to the point of bleeding or tearing muscles. The only thing that makes this possible is a state of consciousness in which the brain no longer receives these signals. And the fact that this crisis took the form of a dance is no coincidence. In 16th century Strasbourg, there was a deep-rooted belief that those who angered Saint Vitus would be cursed and forced to dance. People whose minds were already fragile had internalized this belief on an unconscious level and expressed their repressed pain in exactly the way society expected. Dance scholar Catherine Dickinson summarizes it this way: "This was a collective response to grief. The human body carries within it the pain of major social upheavals. When this pain cannot be put into words, it ultimately manifests itself in the tendons, muscles, and a nervous outburst." This story shows us the breaking point of the human mind. It shows us what a society can do when it has been shaped by hunger, fear, and helplessness for long enough. And perhaps the most unsettling thing of all, that these people aren't all that different from us, because mass psychosis, mass rationalization, and collective hysteria have not disappeared. In times of war, pandemics, major economic crises, and periods when the sense of meaning deepens, people still develop irrational defense mechanisms. The human mind eventually expels the pain it cannot bear. And perhaps the most tragic question is this: the doctors and lawmakers of Strasbourg did their best. They made mistakes, but not out of malice. They acted based on the facts they knew and the tools at their disposal. 500 years later, how different are we? That July morning, the narrow street where Frau Trophea took her first step is still there today. The cobblestones are still the same, but this time it is silent. Perhaps that is how it should be. Those steps taken on a blood-soaked street were not part of a celebration, but rather the ultimate response of the human body and mind to a pain that defies description. And this response remains etched into one of the most striking and best documented pages in the history of medicine. Strasbourg danced in 1518, but what it told us was far older.